If you are new here, nice to meet you. If you are not, welcome back. I am a Procreate artist. I love digital work and I love to work in Procreate. To me, Procreate is like so nice for those of us who cannot stand to look at like super complicated interfaces. And today I'm going to show you guys like stuff that I have learned in Procreate, tips that I have sort of gathered that have elevated my artwork over the years, because I have been working in Procreate for 6 years now. Now, some of these tips, maybe you already know them, maybe you do. Hey, you're smart, you're awesome, but I am going to be going over essentially all of the things that I have sort of picked up, little secrets it feels like whenever I discover them in Procreate, and how like that has sort of helped me experiment with my digital work. So there's a couple things that are on the little wrench tool if you click on it. Firstly is Animation Assist. Animation Assist is great. It is essentially how you can get these little dancing guys, and I use them a lot in my videos and in my reels, but you can also make like full-blown animations out of these. But yeah, Animation Assist just makes it easier to animate your drawings. A little bit under that is Drawing Guide. Drawing Guide is great for a lot of different reasons. I personally use the grid and the symmetry tool the most. Symmetry essentially will just like reflect, if you're drawing on the right side of your iPad, it'll reflect exactly what you're doing on the left side, and you can even break it down to where it can do like quadrant symmetry too. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do with that. Like you can create borders really quickly, you can do like really pretty symmetrical illustrations. Like I love the Drawing Guide. And then if you really need like super straight lines, you can also go to the grid option. If you want to have that assistance, like I said, the symmetry or like the straight lines, you just have to make sure that the layer you're working on, you have assistance turned on, and then that way it'll assist you, and then you can just like move on to another layer, and that layer doesn't have to be assisted, but you can still have that guide on. So even if you just like to have grid lines as a guide and you don't even really need to have like the assistance of getting straight lines, you can just have it there and not even have the assistance. Same thing with the symmetry. If you just need those lines there for you while you're drawing, you can definitely have that turned on and not even have it assisting you. And then we have reference. So I get a lot of questions about this one, because sometimes whenever I do drawing videos, I will have like my canvas that I'm drawing on, and then over off to some corner I will have my reference photo. And before Procreate had this update of being able to turn on reference, you basically had to like put in your picture and just have it on a separate layer and turn it on and off. Now that you have this reference button, you can upload any image, and you can even like use your camera as reference, and that way like it's not in your way while you're drawing, and you can resize it, you can make it really big, you can make it really small, you can zoom in on certain parts of your image. So it's super handy, I love it. And if you work a lot with reference photos, the little wand button next to it, the adjustments. I did not dive into this for a very long time. I would say I did not start experimenting with this until about 2 years ago, but there are some really cool things that you can do in here. So I personally use Gaussian blur a lot to create like shadows behind products in product photos. Like that's super cool. But apart from that, when it comes to artwork, I use noise a lot if I want to add a bit of a grainy effect. So if you like grain in your photos, or if you just like to have an extra bit of texture in your digital work, noise is really, really great. There's a lot of different options now too to like create, I guess, the pattern of the noise, and also see like if you want multiple color dots or just like black and white. So noise is a great option for texture. I also recently discovered bloom. That's a little bit under that. Bloom is great for creating like that super bright, direct light effect. It's almost like a glow, and it doesn't always work. I'm still messing around with it. I'm definitely not an expert, but it just has that like really pretty soft glow that it adds. I think it's really nice. And then we have halftone. Halftone is the love of my life. Halftone is essentially, it mimics like a lot of different things. So there's a version that's like newsprint, where it's just like black and white, but it essentially is just like a pattern of dots, and you can make it really small or really big. And you can also do it where like it does it to your artwork, or you can do a layer on top of your artwork of like solid color with halftone and then just lower the opacity and just let a little bit of those dots show through. That's usually what I pick, but I will turn like photos if I'm doing more graphic designy stuff, or if I'm doing like zines and stuff, I will use that halftone to turn the actual artwork or actual photo into a more like screen printed-esque file. It's just currently that's what I'm obsessed with. Like, it's the love of my life. It adds such a really nice texture and interest to your work. So that's what I've been using a lot lately. And then at the very bottom we have Liquify. Liquify is for you if you are someone that is really into drawing people and like doing references and like using references or doing portraiture, stuff like that. That is my jam. So whenever I am drawing a portrait digitally, I'll be drawing it whatever, and then suddenly I notice that like, I don't know, the person's nose needs to be a little bit wider on this side. Sometimes you can like select it and drag it. I usually will do that if it's a larger area, but if I just need a little, like nudge it a little bit and I don't want to erase, I use the Liquify tool. There's a lot of different options for how you want to quote liquify, but I usually rarely ever change it from push. I will usually keep it at push, and then I can just adjust the size depending on how much I need that push to like move something. But Liquify is super awesome for that. I don't use it for much else, but like I said, if you're really into like more realistic stuff where it involves a lot of like tweaking and any small detail can like make or break your piece, Liquify is really, really great. Now, if we move on to the little video tab under our actions button, the little wrench, we have the time-lapse replay, time-lapse recording, and export time-lapse video. This might seem a little bit more rudimentary to mention, but I just like to mention it because I think it's awesome that Procreate does this. Essentially, as long as you have the time-lapse recording turned on, Procreate records all of your process when it comes to like any of your canvases, and you have the option to replay it, like watch it back and even export it. And I don't always export it. Like, I usually will like to export it if I'm gonna post something and I really want to post like my process of it, but I love to watch the time-lapse replays of my work because especially when I did like a lot of painting, I sometimes can tend to forget like how I did something, or if I kind of like miss an old artwork and really like how I did this one thing, I can go back and sort of replay how exactly I managed to do that. It's really nice. I love that Procreate does it. I always keep it on, and you can export it whenever you want. You can also like export it as either 30 seconds or full length. So if you only want like a little portion of it, you can do that. If you want the whole thing, you can do that. And then if we move over to preferences, I also get a lot of questions about this because I think Procreate initially comes with like a black or like really dark gray background, but I personally prefer more light interfaces, so I have the light interface turned on. That's basically like how you do it. I get weirdly so many questions. People be like, how did you get your Procreate to be gray? That's how. And then of course we have like right hand interface. If you're right-handed or left-handed, that's great. And then I recently discovered the brush cursor. And it basically is like when you are getting close to your screen or your iPad, where you have your Apple Pencil is essentially like, it'll start showing essentially where you have it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it'll start showing like where you're hovering it. And I think it just helps with like hand-eye coordination. It helps you to like not have as many undos, because I do a lot of undos, like double finger taps, because I didn't like how that line looked. And I think having that extra little guide for your hand is nice, because I think that's also like a little bit of like why digitally drawing can have a little bit more of like a learning curve than traditionally drawing, because there is a little bit of like a disconnect, I feel like, between like your body and the material that you're working on. So having that cursor kind of helps make that like hand-eye brain coordination. Something that may seem super daunting is when we go into Brush Studio, and you can go into this by going to any brush on Procreate, and then when you have it selected, you just tap it again and it'll take you to the brush settings. And like I said, it can be really daunting, it can be really scary, because there's so many tabs and so many different settings that you can mess with. But I'm going to show you what you should and should not be messing with, at least according to me, someone who doesn't make brushes and also I'm just not a brush expert, okay? I'm not like a brush creator, but what I tend to mess with is like in stroke path, I will mess with jitter a lot, and essentially what jitter does is it kind of like randomizes your brush a little bit, and you won't know what I'm talking about, but I'm gonna have a visual guide. Essentially, like no jitter would be like a super clean line, and then jitter would be like a little bit of scattering here and there. I like to mess with that a lot because I tend to prefer a little bit of a jittery brush. So there's that. There's also stabilization. If you are someone that works in a much more graphic way, then stabilization will be a great thing for you. Stabilization is essentially like how much your brush is, quote, stabilized. So if I were to draw a straight line, how much is the brush setting gonna help me keep that line straight? I feel like I'm the very opposite of like clean and graphic work, so I never turn stabilization on. But if you are someone that like really likes cleaner shapes, cleaner lines, then I recommend turning that up a little bit, playing around, seeing how much you like your brush to be like more controlled. And then jumping all the way down to color dynamics, I don't remember how I discovered this, but it was quite a while ago. If you are someone that likes a more painterly style, likes a more traditional looking style for your digital work, color dynamics is going to be your best friend. Essentially, this is how your brush interacts with the color that you've selected, and it can be a little bit scary to look at, but what I want you to focus on is stroke color jitter, and the only ones that I touch here are hue and saturation, and it basically means, because it says stroke, every time that you pick up your pencil and put it back down, it will slightly switch up either the hue or the saturation of your color. Quick little color lesson. Hue essentially means color. It's the artistic word for color. Saturation means how much gray is in your color, essentially. I only ever mess with hue and saturation, stroke, color, jitter. Every time you pick up your pencil, put it back down. I say slightly because I only ever mess with it between like 1 to 4%, and that's enough for me. But I mean, you could turn it up. Like you could turn it up all the way, and like every time you pick up your pencil, put it back down. Doesn't matter if you had like orange selected, once you put it back down, it could be blue. But I only like to mess with it a little bit just so that it kind of looks like I've been dipping my brush in paint and I've been like slowly touching other colors so that way my color isn't like exactly the same. Similar to color pressure, so I will also mess with this one. Again, hue and saturation are the only ones that I touch, and I will move the sliders over to the right side slightly. And essentially what this is and how it's different from stroke color jitter is color pressure is basically like, it depends on how much you press on your pencil. Let's say like if you use very light pressure, that means that the color that you've selected is probably going to stay the same. But if you press really, really hard, it's probably going to push that color away from what you've selected, or the saturation away from what you've selected. That'll depend on your work, like if you want it to be every time you pick up your pencil, or if you want to have a little bit more control on like how much pressure you use. Those are the two that I use, and it's really cool. I think it just adds a little bit of nuance. Digital art is all about like those little tiny details that kind of make it not feel as digital, in my opinion. And then lastly, just like as a little bit of like a more useful tip, properties is where you find your brush max and minimum size. So if you've been like playing around with a brush and you feel like you tend to work a little bit bigger and you can't make it bigger, this is where you want to go. You want to go to properties and brush behavior and just make the maximum size bigger, and that way you can use the brush in a bigger size if you want to. Now let's get into layer modes. So layer modes can also be a little bit scary if you're fairly new to digital work, but layer modes on Procreate are going to be found where you have your layer menu, which is your little two screens behind each other, and you see where you see that letter N? That stands for normal. So that basically means that like exactly what you're doing on your layer, that's how it's showing up. And if you actually click on that letter, you have a lot of different layer modes, and these are super fun to play with as you start learning a little bit more about digital work. Now there's a lot, and there's also a lot that I don't use. Just to go over the ones that I do use, multiply and darken are almost the same thing, but they will essentially kind of like take on the color in your layer and darken whatever is below it a little bit. It's great for me personally for shadows or for creating a little bit of depth. Color burn is my favorite, and it basically like, I don't even know how to describe it. It just like takes the color that you have in your layer and like mega saturates it, but then you can also like change it up depending on what color you paint in the layer under it. I don't know, it's super cool. I use it a lot for line art. Linear burn is similar to color burn, but it's gonna be a little bit less intense. Screen is really cool. Again, if you're more of like a graphic design or if you're working a little bit more with like photos, screen can be kind of cool to make things look a little bit more cohesive. I don't know how to explain it, but I'll use it whenever I like prep Rezo stuff or more zine stuff. That's what I like to use screen for. And then add is super cool for light sources. So if I want like a super harsh, direct, like warm sunlight coming into an artwork, I will do that on a separate layer, and then I will turn it into add, and it just like pushes it really, really hard, and you can mess with the opacity, and it just like really levels up your lighting in your work. And then the last one that I will really use often is overlay. Overlay is great for how I mentioned earlier, for example, with the halftone or the noise textures. Overlay is great if you are going to add texture at the very end of your artwork. So if whether it's like a paper texture that you've downloaded or noise, like I said, or halftone, it just kind of like lets all the layers under it peek through with that overlay layer only leaving like a little bit. And it depends on how strong the layer is. You can mess with the opacity and stuff, but that is what overlay is usually used for in my work. It's for like those finishing textural touches. Next is something that I think is really, really cool that Procreate does. I don't know how it does it, but basically when you go to create a new palette under your color palettes, you can create color palettes based off of images, which I think is amazing. The way that I really love this is, and this might be like super specific, but sometimes I will see something that I'm like, I love those colors, but I just don't want the thing, or like I don't like it. For example, I don't know, let's say that I see a shirt that like I don't like it, I would never wear it, but the colors in it are so nice and I want to use those colors in my artwork. I can take a picture of it, and I can even like manipulate it in a photo editing app and make it like more saturated and lighter, and then I can go into Procreate, click add, create palette from image, and then create it from that picture, and it'll come up with a color palette for me from that picture. And I love that it does it without even, it's not like it's like color picking, if that makes sense. So if I were to put the picture into Procreate and then just like color pick the colors, I feel like that doesn't look great. It doesn't look cohesive. Again, it doesn't really look that good unless maybe you're picking one color, but the palette creator, it's sort of like, I don't know, it reads the image and it creates a cohesive palette inspired by that image. And I think it's just so cool. I love it. I use it all the time. And it's just like so easy to make new palettes with it now. Like I don't get as overwhelmed with color picking, because if I'm like, I really want something like really warm or something, I don't know, I'll take a picture of my cubby shelf because there's a bunch of like peachy tones, take a picture of it, like super saturate it, maybe crop in on like the area that I really like the colors, and then make it into a palette. And then like, I don't know, it's just so cool. I love it. I get a lot of questions about like color picking, and when it comes to like illustrative work, that's essentially how I do it. And I keep a bunch of palettes. Sometimes I'll like reduce them down. Sometimes I'll make my own palettes from those colors and like shuffle them around. I love color. It's really fun to do that. So yeah, highly recommend going out and finding color inspiration in real life and then bringing it into Procreate. Last tip that maybe you've probably already done this, but if you haven't, you need to make a folder with your favorite brushes. On brushes, if you scroll up all the way and like even do it a little bit more, a blue plus sign will pop up, and that is essentially so that you can create your very own brush folder. And I have this, I have always had it. It helps me keep track of my favorite brushes so much better, because it can kind of be a little bit workflow disruptive to be like scrolling through and trying to remember where that one brush that you really like is in the Procreate library. So I like to have my favorites folder, and it's a game changer. It's also nice to like kind of see like the pattern of what you like to gravitate towards. Like for example, I really like marker brushes, so that's like what I have in my favorites folder. So yeah, that was my little like tiny little Procreate tips that you can add to your workflow. Like I said, some of these you might have already known them, but I feel like it's all of these like small little nuances that start sort of like building your style and building your digital work. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you have any of your own like little niche tips that you want to share, please do. I love to add to like my Procreate workflow. Before we close out today's video, I am going to quickly talk about the sponsor of today, which is of course Squarespace. If you do not know who Squarespace is, they're an all-in-one platform where you can create your very own website, and they're the platform that I have always used to run my website, my online art business, and my portfolio. They're also a super long-time supporter of this channel, and they have some very cool tools to help me out run my online art store. For example, the commerce tool keeps track of all of my inventory, all of my customer data, customer contact information, like all of the stuff that can be not so fun to keep track of. And then analytics also help me out to see like how much money I'm making, like the profit, how much people are liking certain products, how many orders I had come in compared like this shop update to another shop update, etc. So if you are interested in Squarespace, you can go to squarespace.com for a free trial and you can use my code for 10% off your first purchase.